All right, everybody, and we are back. And what an exciting week two that we have just seen. Um, so, we're going to be doing an updated look at which team holds the balance of power in the National Football League right now and which teams are lacking a source of power right now. So, we're going to start off at number 32, and this is the same as last week. No real surprises here. The Arizona Cardinals. Now, Arizona did have, yet again, looked like Arizona was going to defeat an NFC East team. Last week it was the Washington Commanders. This week it was the New York Giants. At halftime, the Arizona Cardinals were leading by a score of 20-0. So they were shutting out the New York Giants at the half, yet in the second half, they allowed 31 points and scored just 8 of their own to fall 31-28. And the Cardinals allowed Daniel Jones to throw for 321 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Saquon Barkley carried the ball 17 times for 63 yards and a touchdown before his injury. And Daniel Jones rushes 9 times for 59 yards and a touchdown himself. And on Arizona's side, really nothing too impressive here. James Conner did have a nice game, 106 yards and a touchdown on the ground. 0 receivers crossing even 60 yards through the air. Joshua Dobbs, 228 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. So for Arizona, they're sitting here at 0-2 now, and the schedule does not get any easier. In fact, it's going to get quite a bit more difficult. Their upcoming schedule goes Dallas, San Francisco, Cincinnati, LA Rams, Seattle, Baltimore, Cleveland, Atlanta. So, I mean, of those next 8 games, you could very easily make the case that they go 0-8 over that stretch. And we're talking about the Arizona Cardinals being an 0-10 team, with their next remotely winnable game being November 19th against the Houston Texans. Although it's tough to gauge with this team because Arizona's put up quite a good fight the first 2 weeks, but we won't spend any more time on Arizona. And now on to number 31. And here we have the Houston Texans. So this isn't really a slight against Houston. Really, besides Arizona, I would say every team has something to feel good about. But looking at Houston, they were pretty thoroughly outplayed by division rival the Indianapolis Colts this week. It was a score of 31-20, although at one point this game was 31-10, and the Texans were really just able to get some garbage time points on the board near the end of the game. CJ Stroud, though, definitely looks good on the stat sheet. They asked him to throw 47 times, but he throws for 384 yards and 2 touchdowns to no picks. Nico Collins steps up as his number one receiver, seven receptions for 146 yards and a touchdown, as well as rookie Tank Dell, now in a starting role, 7 receptions for 72 yards and a touchdown. And Houston, their upcoming schedule, they have the Jacksonville Jaguars next, followed by the Pittsburgh Steelers, Atlanta Falcons, and New Orleans Saints. So could be a tough next 4 games for them. They might be staring down 0-6. And I don't think Houston will be necessarily one of the worst teams by season's end, although it is entirely possible given how competitive the league is right now. But as we'll see, there are certainly some teams that are already getting pretty banged up with injuries. And I mean, technically, Houston's not really exempt from that with their wide receivers, but they do have somebody like Tank Dell stepping up, whereas some of these other teams are having injuries to notable players and they don't necessarily have a proven option or even a reliable option that they can have step in immediately. So Houston could definitely see themselves creeping up the standings by the end of the year. Not saying they're going to make the playoffs, but I don't think they're really going to be near the bottom of the league, at least not at 31. So moving on to number 30, and this was another team that is 0-2. As if you'll notice, that seems to be the trend so far. And this is going to be the Chicago Bears. So Chicago did lose to Tampa Bay last week by a score of 27-17. And Justin Fields really had a rough go about it. 16 of 29, 211, one touchdown, two interceptions. The Bears really couldn't get anything going on the ground in this one. Although they did finally start to give DJ Moore some looks through the air, he finishes north of 100 receiving yards. And for the Chicago Bears, I mean, they just thoroughly got outplayed in this one. They had nearly half of the total offensive yards that the Tampa Bay Bucks did, less than half of, I'm sorry, nearly half of their passing yards as well, and nearly half of their rushing yards. So pretty much any way you slice it, Tampa Bay was thoroughly outplaying them. And then if we're talking just purely in terms of yards per play, the Bucks had 6.4 to the Bears 4.6, while the Buccaneers had the advantage in terms of first downs, in terms of third down efficiency, and even fourth down efficiency. And the huge one, the Bears allow 6 sacks. The Bucks don't allow any sacks, so definitely not good stuff for the Chicago Bears here. Because while Tampa Bay is a 2-0 team, and I do believe Tampa Bay can win the NFC South, I have been very vocal about that all summer. Tampa Bay is not an invincible team, and for a team like the Chicago Bears that would like to see themselves maybe not necessarily considered one of the NFC's elite. I know there were some people who were deluding themselves into that thought as we got close to the season, later in the preseason. But Chicago's a team that doesn't want to be down with Arizona at the end of the season here. They want to be better than last year. They were already the last place team in the National Football League last year. If they could get 6, 7, somewhere in there in terms of wins for the year, that would be great. But winning a game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, or at least putting up a fight against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that's the way to do it. But as of right now, Chicago really isn't in a great spot. And what's the reward for their 0-2 start? Well, they get to go on the road to Arrowhead Stadium this week against the Kansas City Chiefs, who, while other teams seem to be losing players right now, the Chiefs are gaining Chris Jones and Travis Kelce back. And those guys are only going to get more warmed up and more acclimated to the season as it progresses. Following that, they go at home against Denver, then at the Commanders, and at home against the Vikings. So perhaps some winnable games coming up here for the Chicago Bears, but I think over these next few weeks, we're really going to start to see how all of these teams are going to be looking this year. And for the Chicago Bears, especially, this could be the difference between, is this going to be a repeat of last year or not? And it could really decide, is Justin Fields the starting quarterback going forward? Because if all of a sudden Chicago ends up with another top 5 selection this year, I don't think they're going to pass on another quarterback. They might say, you know what, maybe Justin Fields isn't the answer. We already gave him the benefit of the doubt last year and passed on Bryce Young, but if we have an option in 2024 to go with another young quarterback, maybe it's worth a look. So definitely intriguing to see how that plays out. So number 29, speaking of Bryce Young, we are going to Carolina to discuss the Panthers. And the Panthers just played on Monday night, and this was a tough game to watch. It was a competitive game, and I will say the Carolina fans really were energized for Bryce Young's home debut. It seems like there was some new life breathed into this franchise that was sorely needed, but unfortunately, the product on the field really didn't deliver, at least in terms of offense. Both of these defenses, the Saints and the Panthers, looked very strong, but looking at this Panthers offense, Bryce Young, 22 of 33, 153 yards, one touchdown, no interceptions. So for a guy in his second start, not bad, but that is to be expected. He's going to be getting better as the season progresses. But if we're talking strictly in terms of week 2 going into week 3, then yes, Bryce Young is, and the Carolina Panthers, they are near the bottom of the league here at number 29. Didn't really have much of a ground game either. He really just doesn't have much to work with on this offense. His primary weapons are Adam Thielen and Miles Sanders. And in 2023, that's really not a recipe for success, especially when his offensive line really isn't doing anything remarkable either. Um, So Carolina is definitely a team on the rise, but I'm not too discouraged by their 0-2 start, despite the fact that, yeah, they lost two divisional games and the other three teams in their division are all 2-0. Yes, it is unlikely Carolina ends up winning the NFC South at this point in time for 2023. And because of their slow start, it probably is just going to be too much for them to overcome by year's end. Even if they are able to start to rally this thing come November and December, they already don't have a tiebreaker against the New Orleans Saints. They don't have a tiebreaker against the Atlanta Falcons. Even if they win the rematches against those teams and then sweep the Tampa Bay Bucks, who they haven't played yet, that would give them a 4-2 divisional record. But you're asking them to win every single divisional game at that point. Just very, that's just asking a lot, in my opinion. And looking forward here, Carolina gets hit with Seattle, Minnesota, Detroit, and Miami as their next four. So entirely possible Carolina's staring down an 0-6 start here. A team like the Vikings is already 0-2. They're going to be hungry to turn things around. The Seahawks are 1-1, but they have their sights set on the playoffs. Same with the Detroit Lions. And then you have the Miami Dolphins, one of the best teams in the National Football League right now. So definitely tough sledding ahead for the Carolina Panthers. And if that offense looks the way it did on Monday night, I have a tough time envisioning them beating any of those teams. So now at 28, and I know I'm really not doing this team any favors, but they really haven't been doing themselves many favors, and that's the New York Giants. So the Giants, it took them 6 quarters, technically until the 7th quarter, but they did get points on the board. And it was looking like for a hot minute there, they were about to get shut out by the Arizona Cardinals, which, if that were the case, the Giants very well probably would have been 32 on this list. But as of right now, the Giants are number 28. They did have a strong second half. Daniel Jones looked better. Saquon Barkley looked better. The Giants receivers were more involved. Um, yes, they did lose Saquon Barkley to an injury, which is probably factoring in why they only moved up 3 spots from last week. So, and it was the Arizona Cardinals. They shouldn't have been in that hole to begin with. They end up winning the game on a last-second field goal, 31-28. And I'm sure that's a nice moral victory for the Giants, but if this team is serious about competing for a playoff spot, which they were in last year, they won a playoff game last year, they advanced to the divisional round. If that is the end game, if that's the starting point of where this team needs to be considered successful this year, they can't be going down 20-0 to the Arizona Cardinals at the half. They can't be coming back to beat the Arizona Cardinals 31-28 on a last-second field goal. They need to be dominating the Arizona Cardinals 31-10 or something like that. Especially considering the other three teams in the NFC East all have a 2-0 start. So it is going to be an uphill battle for the New York Giants, to say the least, and they need to look like they did in that second half going forward. So looking at the Giants' upcoming schedule, they actually play tomorrow night against the San Francisco 49ers, and their schedule really does not do them any favors either. It goes San Francisco, Seattle, Miami, Buffalo as their next four. And then even coming out of that stretch, they get hit with the 2-0 Washington Commanders, whose defense has looked absolutely spectacular. So the Giants absolutely needed that win over the Arizona Cardinals, but even then, I'm not holding my breath that they're able to turn things around here. So now on to number 27. And at number 27, this was a team that was flying high after last week, but then just got reality crushed on them this week, and that's the Las Vegas Raiders. And this could simply be a matter of them being in the wrong place at the wrong time. They had a very strong week 1, but then they ended up being the team that had to play the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo after Buffalo lost their first matchup. So they fall 38-10, and this looked like the Jimmy Garoppolo that 49ers fans were frustrated with, and this looked like the reason why the 49ers were so willing to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. 16 of 24, 185 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. Really nothing going on the ground game. Josh Jacobs actually finishes with negative yards. Their leading receivers, Devontae Adams, he gets a lot more going compared to week one, but even then, 6 receptions, 84 yards, and a touchdown. And that's really their only notable receiver there. So, I mean, this was a huge game for Buffalo, just putting themselves back on the map in the AFC and just establishing what everybody knows that they're capable of. But really, to me, this was a game that, yes, it showed what Buffalo is capable of, but also showed what the Raiders are capable of. For anybody who wants to sit here and say that the Raiders are this sleeper team in the AFC and, don't overlook the Raiders could be a team that can compete with some of the AFC's top dogs. Look at all the talent they have on offense. This is the game I'm going to point you at until proven otherwise, because this just seemed to be the week one jitters were gone. This is what these teams were really made of. Kind of just peeling back the mask of our preseason delusions. The Buffalo Bills are a far superior team to the Las Vegas Raiders, and that much was clearly exposed on Sunday. And going forward, the Raiders have the Steelers, the Chargers, the Packers, and the Patriots as their next four. So they will definitely be tested here. While they did win a key divisional matchup week one, they're going to need to start stringing together some more wins if they would like to hang around in the playoff picture. They had a nice buffer, if you will, last week, being the only 1-0 team in the AFC West. Not the case anymore. They are tied now with the Kansas City Chiefs. Granted, the Broncos and Chargers both fell to 0-2, so maybe that catches them a bit of a break, but we will see next Sunday night against Pittsburgh what this team is made of. And then the following week against the Los Angeles Chargers, if they want to really be serious about potentially second in the AFC West, maybe even third. Honestly, I think they have to prove themselves to be anything but last in the AFC West, but we shall see. So on to number 26. And this is a surprise 0-2 team, but that's what the record shows, and it's the Minnesota Vikings. So Minnesota played last Thursday against the Philadelphia Eagles, and it was a tough start, but they were in this game. They ended up losing by only 6. They rallied a bit towards the end in garbage time. Kirk did have the ball in his hands, down by 6 with no time left, technically speaking. If he was able to hit a Hail Mary, maybe the Vikings could have actually won this game. But Kirk Cousins did have a very spectacular performance, 364 yards, 4 touchdowns. Justin Jefferson had himself a day, 11 receptions for 159 yards. But I think the key takeaway here is, yet again, Minnesota can't really get a ground game going. Alex Madison, I don't know if it's him, I don't know if it's the offensive line, I don't know if it's Kevin O'Connell being more of a pass-minded coach, but this team cannot get anything going on the ground. And while, yes, you do have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson, and KJ Osborne all at receiver, it makes your offense one-dimensional. And while, yes, you do have Kirk Cousins who played a spectacular game, this right here should show you, though, that even if Kirk Cousins throws for nearly 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions against what's supposed to be a good defense in the Philadelphia Eagles defense, they can still lose games because they can't run the ball. And as a result, they can't control the clock either. While this game was close, the Eagles nearly doubled the Minnesota Vikings in terms of time of possession. Just shy of 40 minutes to Minnesota being just a touch over 20 minutes. And Minnesota can't hang on to the football either. They fumble 4 times. So that is definitely an indictment on their running game and their running backs. So Minnesota is now at 0-2. Detroit's 1-1. Green Bay's 1-1. So no 2-0 teams in their division. They can climb back into that NFC West picture. NFC North picture if they would like. But they have a tough one coming up this week against another very desperate 0-2 team in the Los Angeles Chargers. If you fall to 0-3 in the National Football League, I don't care what division you're in, it is nearly impossible to make the postseason. And I saw a statistic that said since 2001, only one 0-3 team has made the postseason, and that was the 2018 Houston Texans. And I know, I hear you screaming from the back. What about the extra playoff seed, though? That's just been the last couple of years. Well, even if you did account for the seventh seeds making the playoffs going back to 2001, there would still only be two teams, including that Texans team. So one additional team that came back from an 0-3 deficit to a top seven finish. So if the Vikings or Chargers start off 0-3, I would not count on either of them making the playoffs, which is crazy to believe that both of these teams had very high expectations this year, and one of their seasons is going to virtually be over while we're still in September. Um, I know miracles can happen, but with how talented this league is, it is very hard to dig yourself out of that hole. Talking about winning 3 straight games just to get back to 500, which even then probably isn't good enough for a playoff berth. So now on to number 25. And this is another 0-2 team. This is the Denver Broncos. And Denver's had a couple heartbreakers now. Denver did lose week 1 to division rival Las Vegas Raiders. But now in week 2, they fall at home to the Washington Commanders. And this is one where Denver was in the driver's seat for much of this game as well. After the first quarter, they're up 14-3. After the second quarter, they're up 21-14. After the third quarter, they're up 24-21. But ultimately, when all's said and done, they lose this game 35-33. And Russell Wilson looked good. 308 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Marvin Mims Jr., just 2 catches, but 113 yards and a touchdown. The Denver offense looked good. I'm not going to sit here and say that they looked bad. They scored 33 points. Much of this would have to fall onto the defense, honestly, allowing Sam Howell to throw just a yard short of 300 for 2 touchdowns. Brian Robinson, 87 yards on the ground with 2 touchdowns. And then really a whole bunch of receivers getting involved for the Washington Commanders. Terry McLaurin, John Bates, and then even the running backs Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson. So for the Broncos, this loss isn't the end of the world, but they're just going to need to clean some things up here. They have 2 turnovers compared to the Commanders' 0. That's going to cost you in a close game like this. Because really looking at the rest of this, yeah, Washington did possess the ball a little bit more than the Broncos, 33 minutes compared to 26. But for the most part, their team stats are relatively similar. Very similar in terms of plays run on offense. Very similar third and fourth down conversion percentages. Very similar in terms of the first downs. Even in terms of just passing yards and rushing yards. Almost neck and neck. The difference here, though, is the 2 turnovers and then the sacks. Denver allows 7 sacks to that Washington defense while they only get to Sam Howell 4 times. And I'll say only get to him 4 times because they allowed 7 sacks. If they only allowed 2 sacks but still got to Sam Howell 4 times, that would have been a massive difference. But looking ahead for Denver, they get the Miami Dolphins this week, which really just poor timing on their part because now Miami could advance to 0-3, Denver could fall to 0-3, and like we just mentioned with Minnesota, teams that fall to 0-3 do not have much luck making the postseason. So crazy as it is to believe, Denver and the Los Angeles Chargers could both be 0-3 in that same division after this week. Or potentially the Denver Broncos and the Minnesota Vikings are both 0-3, while the Miami Dolphins are sitting at 3-0. So we shall see. But then coming out of next week, the Broncos do get the Bears and Jets on back-to-back weeks. So definitely some potential wins there. Could help them sort of steer the ship back in the right direction. But then coming out of that stretch, they get the Kansas City Chiefs 2 of the next 3 weeks. So they're going to need to start getting some wins here somewhere. Because their schedule does get difficult later on as well. So definitely interested to keep an eye on the Broncos. As of right now, they're at number 25. Um, would not be surprised if they fall even further this week if they lose to Miami. But if they beat Miami, take it all back. We have a brand new ball game. Denver is live and well in the AFC and kind of reins in Miami's hype train that's really starting to take off right now. So now at number 24, and this team actually ascended quite a bit from last week. I believe last week I had them at number 30. And that team is the Tennessee Titans. So Tennessee gets a pretty clutch win in overtime last week against the Los Angeles Chargers at home. And Tennessee really just controlled this game pretty well. Granted, they were trailing for most of it. So I know I'm saying they're controlling the game, but they were trailing. They never really fell far behind, though. After one quarter, they were down 3-0. After the second quarter, they were down 14-10. After the third quarter, they were up 17-14. And then coming out of the fourth quarter, it was tied at 24-all before, in overtime, Tennessee forces a 3-and-out, and then they're able to kick a field goal to win the game. So Ryan Tannehill looks, excuse me, Ryan Tannehill looks much better this week. He's 20 of 24, 246 yards, 1 touchdown to 0 interceptions. Derrick Henry on the ground, 25 carries, 80 yards, and a touchdown. And Ryan Tannehill had a nice 12-yard run as well for a touchdown. Then through the air, Treylon Burks really starting to get involved. 3 catches for 76 yards. One of those was a massive big play that came up just short of a touchdown. So good to see him finally getting involved. And Tennessee needed this win because they did have an ugly loss to the Saints last week. And it's not ugly in your traditional sense of they got blown out. It was a close game, but they lost 16-15. They just kicked 5 field goals, couldn't really get anything going. But in this game, this was a nice return to form for them. This is how the Titans win football games. Just massive advantage in terms of the ground game. 141 rushing yards to the Chargers 61. And they control the time of possession too. Not by a huge margin, but just shy of 37 minutes for the Tennessee Titans to just over 28 minutes for the Los Angeles Chargers. So if you have the football, you're generally in a more favorable position than if the other team does. Um, but still definitely some red flags here with Tennessee. They allow 5 sacks yet again. When your quarterback's Ryan Tannehill, that's not a great sign. He's not somebody who can get out of the pocket and make plays for himself. So, well, besides that 12-yard run, but really that's more of an outlier for him. So for the Titans, they're going to need to clean some things up going forward here. But that was a nice palate cleansing sort of win. They're back at 500. They go up against the 2 banged up Ohio teams these next 2 weeks in the Cleveland Browns next week and the Cincinnati Bengals the following week. Who knows? If they could pick off one of those 2 games, they're sitting here at 2-2 coming out of the first 4 weeks. That's not bad because their schedule does get easier. These games they're playing at the beginning are considered some of the more difficult matchups. Most people didn't have them projected to beat the Los Angeles Chargers, and they came out with a win. Granted, they did lose a close one to the New Orleans Saints, but New Orleans is a 2-0 team as well and definitely has playoff aspirations of their own. So if they could beat either the Browns or the Bengals, or maybe even both, okay, maybe we can reassess the Tennessee Titans and might more seriously consider them as a potential playoff team for 2023. So moving on to number 23, we have the aforementioned New Orleans Saints. And the Saints, as we said, won week 1 16-15 over the Titans, and then they just played Monday night against the Carolina Panthers where they win 20-17, though that score isn't entirely indicative of how this game went because New Orleans was always, it seemed like, one step ahead of the Panthers this entire matchup. So start out with Derek Carr. He's 21 of 36, 228 yards, no touchdowns and a pick. Chris Olave gets involved here with 6 receptions for 86 yards. And Taysom Hill had himself a big day, 9 carries for 75 yards. And really New Orleans, if you look at the team stats here, It really does show how this game went because New Orleans has the advantage in pretty much everything, but not by a very considerable margin. And some of the red flags for New Orleans, they allow 4 sacks to the Carolina defense. Carolina was getting to Derek Carr quite a bit, and some of those sacks he was taking were quite vicious. Um, and Derek Carr did have the interception, of course, but really not too much to be upset about with the New Orleans Saints here. They start out 2-0. They have a win over a division opponent, um, right where they want to be. I know 23 for a 2-0 team might seem a little bit low, but they just need to keep on stringing these wins together and they will be A-OK. They have the Packers, Bucks, Patriots, and Texans as their next four, so I mean, hey, even if they go 2-2 over that stretch, they'll be a 4-2 football team, so not the worst place in the world at all to be. And now at number 22, this was a team that I was really considering having in the high 20s or near 30th ranked, I suppose I should say, before their matchup Monday night because they really impressed me. And this is, of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this is a team that was a sitting duck after the first week. They get their doors blown off 30-7 against the San Francisco 49ers. And then they're coming back against a Cleveland Browns team that looked absolutely dominant week one. Seemed like it was a recipe for another disaster. But they come out of the gate swinging. First play of the game, they get a pick six off of Deshaun Watson. So right off the bat, Pittsburgh is in the lead. And really, this is a back and forth game the rest of the way. But Pittsburgh doesn't allow, when Cleveland does take the lead, Pittsburgh doesn't let them get too far ahead. And Pittsburgh always responds shortly thereafter. The Steelers end up winning 26-22. Of course, the big story in that game is Nick Chubb pretty much getting his leg snapped in half. Condolences to him. Always been a trooper at the running back position, but he is almost certainly done for the season now. But Pittsburgh did a great job of containing the Cleveland Browns otherwise here. Cleveland did have the advantage in total yards and in rushing yards, and in passing yards for that matter. But what it comes down to is Cleveland fumbled the ball 3 times. They threw that pick six to start the game, and they allowed 6 sacks. So Pittsburgh had an effective defensive game plan. Mike Tomlin knew what he was getting into with this game, and the Steelers are in a good spot now at 1-1. They have the tiebreaker over the Cleveland Browns. The game they lost was an out-of-conference game, so that's not going to be too consequential for them in the standings. Now they play Sunday night next week against the Las Vegas Raiders. If they play how they did against the Browns, that should be a win. I will say for the Steelers, I am still concerned with their offense. I know George Pickens had a nice play last week, but other than that, they really just have struggled to get their playmakers going. Pat Freiermuth, virtually non-existent out there. Najee Harris just struggling to pound the rock. Jalen Warren, in fact, has been more effective than Najee Harris thus far, and Kenny Pickett has really not looked great with many of his throws. So hopefully we'll see the Steelers offense put it together a little bit better next week because I do like the Steelers defense going up against that Raiders offense. And after that, they get the Houston Texans on the road, so quite possible the Steelers could rebound and be 3-1 here, heading into a crucial Week 5 matchup with the Baltimore Ravens, where that could potentially be for first place in the AFC North. I don't want to look too far ahead right now, but the Steelers play their cards right. They are still very much alive in this AFC North with Nick Chubb being banged up and Joe Burrow being banged up. So if they can get that tiebreaker over the Ravens as well, massive for the Steelers' hopes going forward. So now at 21, and this is a team that I have loved the effort out of so far this year. This was right around where I had them last week, but they just had a dominant win this week, and that is, of course, the Indianapolis Colts. So while the Colts did fall just short to the Jaguars in week 1, they take it to the Houston Texans in week 2. And they win 31-20. I know the score makes that seem like it was a little bit close, but a lot of those points for the Texans were in garbage time. This was a 31-10 matchup for quite a while. And Anthony Richardson gets banged up yet again in this game. Gardner Minshew has to finish things off. Neither quarterback looks bad per se, but definitely a shame because I would say out of all the rookie quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson probably looked the best out of any of them so far, with CJ Stroud now honestly as a close second. But Zach Moss gets things going for the Colts on the ground. Anthony Richardson another 2 touchdowns. And really this was just an all-around great win for the Colts. They get CJ Stroud 6 times, so you will take that all day. This Colts defense has been playing alive and well and with a purpose. Um, the Colts don't turn the football over at all. Love to see that. And really, Indianapolis has just surprised me so far this year. I didn't think they were going to be as put together as they already are. 1-1 record in the AFC South, very nearly defeated the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you can make the case that, hey, if they had Jonathan Taylor out there, maybe they'd be 2-0 in the driver's seat in the AFC South. So their upcoming schedule, they do have the Baltimore Ravens this week. And this could be a potential trap game for the Ravens with how great of an effort the Colts have been playing with. If the Colts really want to try to establish themselves in the AFC, hey, you beat the Ravens this week. You have the same record as them and a tiebreaker over them. So while yes, the Ravens are 2-0, it's just 2 wins. They're not invincible. A 1-1 team like the Colts could absolutely overtake them this week. And then going forward from there, they have the Los Angeles Rams, Tennessee Titans, and a rematch with the Jaguars. So definitely a difficult 4 games here, but I think we will really see what this Colts team is made out of, because if they could pull off an upset or two in here, the Colts could really be hanging around in this AFC playoff picture. So now at number 20, and this is another team that had a great effort last week, great defensive stand, and that is the Washington Commanders. Their defense has looked just vicious this year so far, and while they did allow 33 points to the Broncos, they won the game 35-33. Um, and this one was a heartbreaker, like we mentioned when we were talking about the Broncos, but Washington really had an overall well-rounded effort here. Sam Howell and Brian Robinson had great games, as we mentioned when we talked about the Broncos, and the Commanders controlled the clock here. They were able to force a couple turnovers. They got to Russell Wilson 7 times. That is the recipe for success. And Washington, they have a tough schedule coming up here with the Bills and Eagles back-to-back, but after that, it's going to go Bears, Falcons, Giants, the next 3, so if they could pull off an upset against either the Bills or Eagles, Washington could definitely be one of those sleeper teams in the NFC, especially if Sam Howell's able to really start to string together some solid performances here, or at the very least manage the game when he needs to. So definitely enthusiastic about Washington, and I think at number 20, it's appropriate right now. They're on the outside of the playoff picture looking in, but man, if they beat Buffalo this week, they could zoom up this list so fast. Um, so now on to 19, and this is actually an 0-2 team, and I know you're going to put an 0-2 team over the Washington Commanders and the New Orleans Saints, but this is a team that had a couple of tough matchups, so I will give them that, and that's the New England Patriots. They are 0-2, but definitely dealt a bad hand in terms of the schedule out of the gate here. They lose by 5 to the Philadelphia Eagles week 1 before losing to the Miami Dolphins by 7 last week. So, not the end of the world there. The Patriots are definitely in these games, and if we're going to hype up the Dolphins, if we're going to hype up the Eagles, the Patriots were right there with those teams. And this week they get the New York Jets on the road. This is a game that the Patriots should win. I know the Jets have a tough team, but Zach Wilson against that Patriots defense, Bill should be licking his chops at the idea of his defense attacking Zach Wilson this week. And they're going to need this win, because after that they get the Dallas Cowboys on the road. So if they could at least be 1-2 with a divisional win, tiebreaker over the Jets, they'll be firmly in third place in the AFC East for for hopefully the foreseeable future. Um, But as of right now, they're only at 19 because they did lose those two games to the Dolphins and Eagles. Losing to the Dolphins in particular is that's a tough one because that's a divisional loss. Miami's already 2-0. They could potentially be 3-0 after this week. The Patriots are going to have a tough time playing catch up with them, and they still have to play the Buffalo Bills twice as well, so who knows how things shake out. It's going to be tough to get those divisional tiebreakers. That's why this matchup with the Jets this week is so big. And at 18, speaking of the New York Jets, this is where we'll have them come in. So they're going to match up with the New England Patriots this week. Really, coming out of this week, that matchup is going to determine what direction these teams head. Whoever wins that matchup, probably going to be around 15, maybe even higher, depending on how the game goes. Whoever loses, probably falling down to the 20s. So for the New York Jets, they had that nice win over the Buffalo Bills week 1, but then they just get their rear ends handed to them last week in Dallas. Zach Wilson throws 3 interceptions. That is not going to cut it. I know Dallas has an amazing defense, but you need to take care of the football, plain and simple. And Dallas just dominates this game in terms of time of possession. 42 minutes to not even 18 for the New York Jets. And the Jets have a fumble on top of that as well. So the Jets allow 3 sacks, 1 fumble, 3 interceptions, and as a result, they don't even have the football for 20 minutes in this game. Not a recipe for success. And I know Aaron Rodgers was a big piece to this puzzle, but their offensive line was always going to be pretty shaky. Now with Zach Wilson back there behind that offensive line, definitely starting to get very concerning for the New York Jets. And as we look forward with their schedule, they have the New England Patriots this week, as we know, and that one is going to be a huge matchup for them as well, because coming out of that, they play the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday night. So they lose to the Patriots this week, they could very well be 1-3. And if you're the New England Patriots, you want to win this matchup against the Jets for reasons I just mentioned, because they have a tough week 4 matchup as well. At the very least, assuming that the Chiefs beat the Jets and that the Cowboys beat the Patriots, a Patriots win this week means, okay, at least coming out of week 4, both of these teams will be 1-3 with the Patriots still in 3rd place in the AFC East. And at the very least, can try to turn their season around with some wins to try to get back into that wild card picture, but unfortunately for the Jets, I think if they lose to the Patriots this week, this could be the start of things just going off the rails for them. So we shall see with the New York Jets how this once promised season will end up for them. So now it's 17, and I believe last week this was the team that was right next to the New York Jets in the power rankings as well, and that is the Green Bay Packers. And man, I was pulling so hard for Green Bay to beat the Atlanta Falcons this week. And nothing against Atlanta, they've been a pretty fun story as well, but Green Bay with Jordan Love really has been looking really solid so far this year. And Jordan Love, another flawless performance, 14 of 25, 151 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. And he's been spreading the ball around pretty well while he's waiting for Christian Watson to return. Jaden Reed gets a big day this Sunday with 4 receptions, 37 yards, 2 touchdowns. But with Aaron Jones out, they really can't get much going on the ground, which is a big problem for them. And it really shows when you look at the time of possession. Atlanta was a big team in terms of running the football this season so far, or they have been a big team that has been running the football so far this year, but Atlanta holds the time of possession here 36 to just over 36 minutes to the Packers being just under 24. And the Falcons have 211 rushing yards to 84 to Green Bay. So nearly a 130-yard difference there. And then through the air, they throw for nearly 100 more yards as well. So when all is said and done, they almost exactly double the Packers in terms of total offensive yards, 446 to 224. And while Green Bay didn't turn the football over, they only got sacked once. I think it ultimately comes down to them just not being able to run the ball as effectively as Atlanta. And that was their downfall. So We will see how things look for Green Bay going forward. They match up with the New Orleans Saints this week. Hopefully they could get Christian Watson and Aaron Jones back and healthy, because after that matchup with the Saints, they're going to get the Detroit Lions at home, which could very well be a loss. And that could be a game where if the Packers lose to the Saints this week and then they lose to the Lions the following week, we could really start to see Detroit just run away with that NFC North. So a pair of huge games coming up here, and that Lions matchup is actually on a short week as well. So going to be seeing a lot of the Green Bay Packers here in just a few days. Now moving on to number 16, now in the top half. And this is another 0-2 team. I know have them over some teams with some wins, but it's the Cincinnati Bengals, and they certainly looked better than they did in week 1. I know Joe Burrow aggravated his calf injury, and for that reason, I have a tough time saying the Bengals are going to rebound strongly, at least now. But this is what I think the anybody who was trying to project like the Bengals' worst fears in the summer, this is what they would have looked like early season. And I know the Bengals started 0-2 last year, but I think this is different this time. They lose 2 divisional matchups, so now they don't have a tiebreaker against the Cleveland Browns. They don't have a tiebreaker against the Baltimore Ravens. And they're going to need to win their rematch with Baltimore and Cleveland if they don't want to have those teams have a decisive tiebreaker over them when it comes to winning the AFC North down the stretch. But the Bengals might not even need to worry about that, because they're going to need to worry about making the playoffs. Remember the stat we said with 0-3 teams making the playoffs? Well, if they start 0-3, let me just say, odds are they're not going to make the playoffs. It'll be very difficult. And they do get an extra day of rest. They play on Monday night this week against the Los Angeles Rams, but the Rams have looked very good this season so far. They have certainly impressed, and this is a Super Bowl rematch from just 2 seasons ago. I know both teams are going to be hungry for this one, but if Joe Burrow's hobbling around on a calf, it seems like that injury was already bothering him. He was already struggling to make throws down the field, really struggling to get some power on his throws, really struggling to get that zip that he's known for. But if he aggravated that injury, one, we don't even know if he's going to play Monday night. And their backup's Trevor Siemian, I believe. So definitely a massive step back going from Joe Burrow to Siemian. And then on top of that, you fall to 0-3. It's just tough to see a path for them to get back to the playoffs, because keep in mind, they haven't played the 49ers yet. They haven't played the Bills yet. They haven't played the Chiefs yet. They still have to play the Steelers twice. They still have to play the Browns again. They still have to play the Ravens again. They still have to play the Jaguars. They still have to play the Vikings. They still have to play the Seahawks. They still have to play the Titans. And then even some of the other matchups in there, like the Indianapolis Colts, like this is not going to be an easy schedule for the Cincinnati Bengals. And this is why when I said in the summer when I was doing the predictions, Jamar Chase just better watch out, saying that it's all right if they fall into an early hole here, because this is a difficult schedule, and other teams in the AFC, especially in the AFC North, are not going to be waiting around for the Bengals to catch up. Teams like the Baltimore Ravens are running right now full speed, and they are running for that AFC North crown. I would say the Cleveland Browns were on the fast track to the AFC North crown before Nick Chubb went down, but that might be a lucky break for the Bengals. But as a result, the Pittsburgh Steelers seem to be a bit rejuvenated. So now, while Cleveland is a little bit in check right now as well, it opens things up for the Steelers. So I just don't know what the record's going to be that's going to win that AFC North. Maybe it's a case of all these teams just beat each other up, and maybe the Bengals could win the division at like 10-7, but I do believe one team is going to get 11-12 wins. And if the Bengals start out 0-3, I have a very tough time believing it's them. Because you just have to think, if they lose this week to the Rams, they're going to have to finish 11-3 just to finish 11-6. And that might not even be good enough to win the AFC North. Who knows if it's even good enough to make the AFC playoffs, although the AFC playoffs are definitely looking more open here by the week as Aaron Rodgers goes down and Nick Chubb goes down, and here with the Bengals with Joe Burrow. So who knows what this AFC playoff picture is going to look like when all's said and done. But Monday night against the Rams is about as must win as you can get for the Cincinnati Bengals, and they're going to need Burrow out there to make that happen. I just don't know if that's the case. So right now, middle of the pack for the Bengals. This thing could really go either way. They could end up in the Super Bowl by the end of the season. They could end up picking in the top 10. Who knows? Number 15. This is a team that really sent a message after a tough Week 1 performance, and that was the Seattle Seahawks. So for Seattle, they did lose to the Rams Week 1 pretty badly, but last week they come back here and they go on the road to Detroit. They put a rain on the Super Bowl parade, and they win this thing 37-31 in overtime. Geno Smith looked every bit the part. 328 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Got all of his receivers involved here. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Noah Fant, even Colby Parkinson, Will Dissly, Jackson Smith and Jigba. You name it. He was spreading the ball around. And this was a shootout to say the least. Both teams pretty even in terms of time of possession. Not really a lot of sacks in this game at all. Really not a lot of punts either. Only 4 punts in this game. Seattle punts 3 times. Detroit only punts once. Yeah, this is about as good of an effort as you could ask if you're Pete Carroll. So the Seahawks are now 1-1. They have a tiebreaker over the Lions in the standings, which could be crucial down the line if both of these teams end up in a wild card positioning. I kind of have my doubts that Seattle can win the NFC West at this point, given how strong San Francisco's looked, but who knows if Seattle and Detroit both win their divisions. Could be the difference of Seattle having a higher seed than Detroit. So Seattle's schedule actually doesn't look too bad coming up. They go Carolina, then the Giants, the Bengals, the Cardinals, and the Browns as their next 5. So I think they could get at least 3 wins in there. I think they could get at least 3 wins. We could talk about them being a 4-3 team after week 7, maybe even 5-2. Who knows? Could even be better. But definitely a solid rebound for Seattle after a tough week 1 because it really looked like they were on the outside looking in after week 1, but they're firmly back in the thick of things now after week 2, and I'd say things are only looking up for Seattle at this point. So now at number 14, this is another 2-0 team, and one that has really surprised some people so far this year. And that's the Atlanta Falcons. And Atlanta, we already kind of discussed this matchup for them last week against the Green Bay Packers, 25-24, so I won't go too in-depth with it again here, but I will say for the Falcons, if their strategy for this year is to make themselves more of a rush-focused team, more of a run-based team, that was an angle I really didn't consider, and was one I really probably should have considered, considering they drafted Bijan Robinson. But with the two-headed monster of Bijan and Tyler Algier, really takes a lot of weight off of Desmond Ritter's shoulders. And all you have to ask him to do is really just make a couple plays to Drake London and Kyle Pitts throughout the game, and one of them should be open on a given play. So yeah, while Desmond Ridder, I really don't have a ton of confidence in him still. I like the way that Atlanta's using him so far. I think they're able to not ask too much out of him, and he's able to succeed because of that. So Atlanta's 2-0 now, surprisingly. They got a divisional win over the Panthers week 1, and now a win over Green Bay in week 2. Green Bay, a team that's looked very strong, so upcoming they have 2 difficult matchups against Detroit and Jacksonville. But after that, it's going to go Houston, Washington, Tampa Bay, Tennessee, Minnesota, Arizona, New Orleans, the Jets, Tampa Bay again. Like, I'm just going down the schedule. There's a lot of winnable games here for Atlanta after these next couple weeks. There really are. So, I'm excited for Atlanta here. I thought they could have been a sleeper in the NFC South heading into the season. But man, I might even go as far as to say they could be the front runner in the NFC South right now. But Tampa Bay's also 2-0. New Orleans is also 2-0. So who would have thought that? Three 2-0 teams in the NFC South. Look forward to seeing them match up with Detroit on Sunday, because if they could pull off that upset to go 3-0, wow, maybe we could be talking about Atlanta as a potential playoff team in the NFC for sure. So look forward to seeing what they have coming up for us. Now at number 13, staying in the NFC South with the Tampa Bay Bucks, another 2-0 team. And honestly, maybe I should have even switched Tampa Bay and Atlanta here, but we'll see how this progresses as the weeks move on. I say that because Tampa Bay did have the more convincing win, but they also played the worst team, the inferior opponent, I should say, the Chicago Bears. They win 27-7. As we mentioned when we talked about the Bears, Justin Fields had a pretty rough day. Baker Mayfield had another pretty solid performance here. Over 300 yards, one touchdown, no interceptions. Bucks finally able to get a ground game going. Rashad White, 17 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown. Mike Evans, looking like it's 2018 out there. 6 receptions, 171 yards, and a touchdown. And really, this was just a dominant performance by Tampa Bay. They had 2 turnovers off of Justin Fields, 2 interceptions, I should say. And they got to Justin Fields 6 times. They sacked him 6 times, while Baker Mayfield got sacked 0. So definitely a recipe for success there. Tampa Bay dominates the time of possession as well, just around 36 minutes to around 24 for Chicago. Really couldn't have asked for a better win for Tampa Bay. If they're going to win games, this is how they're going to do it. And now if Baker Mayfield is able to just utilize Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as his weapons, they could really, things could really be looking up for them. But unfortunately for them, they do have the Philadelphia Eagles coming in this week. Now, if they could pull off that upset, that'd be massive for them. That'd go a long way in terms of them trying to win the NFC South. But they do have the New Orleans Saints right after that. So even if they lose to the Eagles, if they could beat the Saints the following week, they could find themselves right back atop of the NFC South. Although, who knows, maybe it's Atlanta, but they do play Atlanta a couple weeks after that. So start to see some of these head-to-head matchups in the NFC South over the next few weeks here. And that'll really start to help show which team is going to emerge here. It seems like it's a 3-team race right now, with Carolina at 0-2 with 2 divisional losses. But between Tampa Bay, New Orleans, and Atlanta, love to hear who you guys think is going to end up winning that division, because right now, I think it really could go either way. I would probably favor either Tampa Bay or Atlanta. I think they've just looked better, but won't count out New Orleans either. I think all 3 of those teams bring just a little bit something different to the table, and something that and there are some things that aren't necessarily common around the National Football League right now, like Atlanta with its run game, Tampa Bay with its dominant defense, and New Orleans where it's really just kind of a jack of all trades kind of team where they really don't have one glaring weakness. So now at number 12, and this is an 0-2 team. I think this is the highest I have an 0-2 team on this list. And this team's really just pushed all the right buttons. They just, for whatever reason, come up short these last couple weeks, and that's the Los Angeles Chargers. Talk about snake-bitten franchises. This team might be the most snake-bitten of them all. So Los Angeles loses a heartbreaker in overtime to Tennessee, as we mentioned. Herbert has a great game, 305 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. They were definitely missing Austin Eckler out there, not really able to get much of a ground game going. Although Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were firing on all cylinders on offense, so good to see those guys getting involved. But really the Chargers, this is one of those instances where it's like there really wasn't much they could have done differently here. They don't turn the ball over. They only allowed 3 sacks. They only punt 6 times. The time of possession's not in their favor, but it's pretty close. Just over 28 minutes, just shy of 37 minutes for Tennessee. They have the advantage in passing yards, although they could have run the ball more. They could have had more success on the ground, and that's probably where Austin Eckler comes in. They have Austin Eckler healthy for this game. the Chargers probably end up winning it. But as it stands right now, the Chargers are 0-2. If they're able to get Austin Eckler back going forward, that could definitely be very big for them because they play another desperate team this week in the Minnesota Vikings. Then they go Raiders, Cowboys, Chiefs as their following three. So they're definitely going to want to get wins over the Vikings and Raiders these next 2 weeks here because otherwise, very difficult matchups after that against the Cowboys and Chiefs. And even if they do win these next 2 weeks, they could very well be 2-4. They don't want to be staring down 0-6. So now at number 11, we'll actually stay in Los Angeles with the Rams. And the Rams have been very impressive this year. They've probably been the team that's overachieved. I'm not going to say overachieved because Sean McVay is a very talented coach and he knows what kind of pieces he needs to utilize in his offense. But I'd say they've impressed me the most besides Atlanta this year, honestly. Probably even more so than Atlanta, but those are definitely the top two, I would say. So the Rams do lose last week to the 49ers, but only by the score of a touchdown, 30-23. And the Rams were in control of this game for a while here. They were tied at the half. They're only down by 3 after the third quarter, and they only end up losing by 7. And I would say the difference really comes down to the turnovers here. So Matthew Stafford throws 2 interceptions, whereas the 49ers don't turn the ball over at all, and that's really going to be the difference here. Each team allows just 1 sack, and the Rams actually had a very good third down defense in this game. San Francisco was just 2 of 9 on third down. But other than that, the Rams held the time of possession 33 minutes to just under 27 for the San Francisco 49ers. So the Rams had the football here. It seems like whatever Sean McVay's game plan was for this season seems to be going pretty well so far. If they could just limit the turnovers, they could hang with the best teams in the NFC here. San Fran is just as good as anybody in the NFC, just as good as anybody in the NFL. And to me, this game is the exact opposite of, say, like the Raiders and Bills. You had a team that was considered one of the at the forefront of the AFC, one of the perennial contenders in the Buffalo Bills, and a more up-and-coming team in the Las Vegas Raiders, a team that had an offensive-minded coach. Oh, well, don't sleep on the Raiders. They have talent. That was the narrative around them. Oh, well, they can make some noise in the AFC West. The Rams are kind of in a similar boat in the NFC, where they're kind of middle of the pack team. Could be bad, could be good. Nobody really knows heading into the season, but unlike the Raiders who got their doors blown off 38-10, the Rams very nearly beat the 49ers, and this was a very back and forth game. I'd be interested to see how these teams match up when they play each other later on this season. Would not be surprised at all if the Rams end up winning that matchup. I think as of right now, despite losing this game, the Rams absolutely are in the mix for an NFC playoff spot this year. I think if this team continues to show the heart that they've had so far, because they haven't even had Cooper Kupp either, keep in mind. They get him back and they could stay healthy, execute Sean McVay's game plan, they'll be going places. Believe that. So then at number 10, and man, this team was so high last week, and I think they would have been right up there with another big win this week, but that's the Cleveland Browns. And Cleveland lost on Monday night to Pittsburgh, as we know, 26-22. And the even bigger loss was Nick Chubb, done for the season. They do bring back Kareem Hunt, so perhaps they could get him going. But after already losing Jack Conklin for the year at right tackle, now they lose their starting running back. That was 2 of the pieces I loved most on their offense, was their offensive line and their backfield. And right now, both of those are in limbo. Definitely the rookie right tackle has stepped in and played well for them. His name's escaping me at the moment, out of Ohio State. I want to say his name was Wyatt, but he's looked good so far, but even then, having him come off the bench to relieve Jack Conklin when he's tired is a lot better than him just being out there every single snap with pretty much nobody behind him. And then Jerome Ford, he did look good out there in Nick Chubb's absence, but he's not Nick Chubb. It is yet to be seen if he could do this on a week-to-week basis. And they are bringing Kareem Hunt, so these guys stay in the top 10 for now, but definitely wary of Cleveland going forward. Um, I still like them. I still like the Browns, but I'm maybe not as high on them as I once was. And they go Tennessee, Baltimore, San Francisco as their next three, so these are tough matchups. And that week 4 matchup in particular against the Baltimore Ravens could be massive. They dropped that matchup, and now they don't have tiebreakers against the Steelers and Ravens. It's an uphill battle. It's going to be an uphill battle. So we'll see with the Browns. Still a lot to figure out for them right now. Then at number 9, this is a team that lost this week, but really they should still be able to hold their heads high. And that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. So they lose to the Kansas City Chiefs at home after the Chiefs do get Travis Kelce and Chris Jones back. So not the end of the world for the Jaguars. They end up losing 17-9, so you probably would have liked to see more points on the board. But overall, the Jaguars defense held up well in this game, surprisingly well against the Chiefs offense, but the bigger story was the Chiefs defense. And the Jaguars did have one fumble in this game, 0 interceptions. The time of possession was pretty much neck and neck, both right around 30 minutes. And they were able to get Patrick Mahomes to force an interception, and they forced 2 fumbles from the Kansas City Chiefs as well. They did allow 4 sacks, which definitely played a factor. They were driving near the end of the game with the potential to tie it, but they just couldn't punch it in on 3rd and goal, 4th and goal. So sitting here at a 1-1 record, this could be a potential game they look back on and say, man, wish we beat the Chiefs so we could have a higher seed than them in the playoffs so we don't have to go back into Arrowhead. But here we are. Both teams are a 1-1 record now. And for Jacksonville going forward, they go Houston and Atlanta for their next 2, so should be a couple good opportunities to get back in the win column before they get hit with Buffalo in London week 5. So that'll be another big one for a couple AFC heavyweights going at it. Who's going to be rising to the occasion? Who's going to be slipping down? So definitely have that one circled on my calendar. Now at number 8, speaking of the Buffalo Bills, they climb right back into the top 10 after a dominant win last week. Really put a scare on us after that loss to the Jets week 1, but now I think everybody knows what this team is capable of. Josh Allen had as fine an outing as you could ask for. He had 274 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Really wasn't involved on the ground much while he deferred to James Cook primarily, but also Damian Harris and Latavius Murray. Love to see that. I have been screaming that for years now, that the Bills need to just feed the running backs more and put less on Josh Allen's plate as a runner. And the Bills dominate time of possession here, more than double the time of the Las Vegas Raiders. They only punt the ball 1 time. The entire game, they punted just 1 time. They allowed 2 sacks, no turnovers, had more than double the first downs that Vegas did. This was a flawless performance. And if this is how Buffalo can look going forward, look out, because when we have Aaron Rodgers out for the season, Joe Burrow hobbled on a calf injury, Nick Chubb done for the season, the Chargers 0-2, this opens a door for Buffalo to walk right back into the front of the line for the AFC. And in 2 weeks, they're going to have a massive matchup with the Miami Dolphins, where really whoever wins that matchup should be in the driver's seat for the AFC East, I would say. It's going to come down to that matchup in week 4. But this week they do have the Washington Commanders first, and that's not a game to be overlooked. Washington's defense has looked very solid so far this year. And then in week 5, they're going to get the Jacksonville Jaguars, as we mentioned, in London. So next few weeks will tell us a lot about the Buffalo Bills season, but then after that their schedule opens up. So if they could right the ship here for the next few weeks, man, maybe Buffalo could really go on a run here towards the top of this AFC yet again. So moving on to number 7, speaking of the top of the AFC, we're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs getting back in the win column after an 0-1 start. And yeah, the Chiefs did have a tough start in week 1, losing by 1 point to the Detroit Lions without Travis Kelce and Chris Jones, but they win by 8 points on Patrick Mahomes' birthday against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And this was a close, low-scoring game, pretty uncharacteristic for the Chiefs, but they have the edge in pretty much every team statistical category. You'd like to see them not turn the ball over as much, 2 fumbles and an interception. So I'd like to get that under control, but Patrick Mahomes only gets sacked 1 time. They only punt the ball 4 times. And hey, a win's a win, and this was a team that needed a win pretty badly. So for the Chiefs going forward, they get to go up against maybe Patrick Mahomes' favorite team to play against, the Chicago Bears. Always seems to remind them that they passed on him. But after that, they get the New York Jets on Sunday night, week 4. So for the Chiefs, that should be 2 wins. And then they play a couple teams right now who still don't have 1 win. The Minnesota Vikings and the Denver Broncos. And actually the Los Angeles Chargers, if you want to lump them in there too, making up their next 4 games because they play the Denver Broncos twice. So it's going to go Bears, Jets, Vikings, Broncos, Chargers, Broncos again before they play the Dolphins and Eagles. Well, the Dolphins, then the bye week, then the Eagles. So the next 6 weeks are going to be very big for the Kansas City Chiefs. If they could even go 4-2 in that stretch, they could be having a 5-3 record heading into the Miami game. But ideally, they could go 5-1, really give themselves a bit of a cushion to play with. But we shall see. But definitely things are looking up for the Chiefs. They're getting Kelce and Jones back while other teams in the AFC are losing their star players. So don't want to sleep on Kansas City. If you're doing that at this point, I don't really know what you're doing being a football fan because you've seen this story before. So now at number 6, and this is a team that lost in overtime this week, and that's the Detroit Lions. Still have them ahead of Kansas City because they did beat them last week, and because they did lose a very close matchup this week. Detroit, though, have a lot of confidence in them still. They play Atlanta this week. I think they're going to have definitely some better luck this week, although Atlanta's going to be hungry as well. Definitely going to be an exciting matchup. So Detroit has Atlanta, Green Bay, Carolina, Tampa Bay as their next 4. They could easily win all 4 of those games, or I should say they're easily capable of winning all 4 of those games. So if Detroit wants to really put their foot on the gas in the NFC North, now is the time to do it. Get ahead, make the other teams catch up to you. And I really can't say that Detroit had too much they did wrong last week. Like I said, they only punted the ball 1 time. They did turn it over 3 times though, so that's not a recipe for success. If they could just get those turnovers in check though, this team will be in business. So now at number 5, moving up after starting 2-0, another tight victory this week, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles. They defeated the Minnesota Vikings by 6 points, as we mentioned, after defeating the New England Patriots by 5 points. But I'm really not too worried about the Eagles. They did this a lot last year where they would win 1-possession games over teams they were considered better than. Think the Indianapolis Colts, or when they played the Houston Texans, it was close for a while. Even when they played Green Bay, they were kind of hanging around for a bit in the 3rd quarter. So looking at the Eagles' upcoming schedule, they go Tampa Bay, Washington, and then the Rams and Jets for their next 4. Honestly, going into the season, the toughest matchup there should have been the Jets, but right now I'd say it's the Rams, maybe even the Commanders and Bucks. They're both 2-0 as well. So definitely not to sleep on these next 4 matchups, but if the Eagles want to prove that they are still the team to beat in the NFC, just take care of business here, win these next 4, head into that big Week 7 matchup against the Dolphins at 6-0. So not really too much else to say on the Eagles, and I think they're just going to keep hoeing and humming here as the season progresses. So now at number 4, the Baltimore Ravens, and they did have a close matchup with the Bengals this week. You could debatably switch the Eagles and Ravens here, but the Eagles had some close matchups too, so I'm not going to hold it against the Ravens or the Eagles. But for Baltimore, they have a winnable matchup this week as well against the Colts. They should be able to beat the Cleveland Browns in Week 4 without Nick Chubb and Jack Conklin now. And then Week 5 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, that could be a big matchup. So Baltimore, like Buffalo, they're one of those teams where you're seeing the AFC playoff picture slowly open up here week by week. Jets kind of falling out of it. Bengals are a question mark. Browns have their question marks. Chargers doing Charger things. Um, there's room there for teams to emerge, and Miami has absolutely emerged, and we haven't even talked about them yet. Baltimore's emerged. Buffalo's climbing back into the picture. Kansas City's reestablishing themselves. Jacksonville's still hanging around there. So definitely some room for Baltimore to make some noise this year, and I think if they just keep on stringing together some wins, they're going to be in a great place by the end of the season. So now at number 3, our last AFC team, the aforementioned Miami Dolphins. These are the only 2-0 teams, by the way, in the AFC, the Ravens and Dolphins, surprisingly. But the Miami Dolphins, they played Sunday night last week against the New England Patriots. They win by 7 points. Not the most impressive victory in the world, but a win's a win. They beat the Chargers and Patriots to start out the season, and those are two talented teams. So now they get the Denver Broncos at home this week, and this should be another win. If they're 3-0 heading into that matchup with the Bills week 4, look out, because if they could win that matchup against Buffalo week 4, they get the Giants and Panthers week 6. We could very, very easily be talking about the Dolphins being 6-0. So yeah, that's really it with Miami. I don't want to look too much further ahead than that, but they're in a great spot right now. And in terms of the Dolphins matchup this past week, really not too much they need to tighten up. Tua did throw 1 interception, but he only got sacked 1 time. They only punted 3 times. Time of possession was pretty neck and neck. So yeah, feeling good about Miami still in the top 3. Just staying healthy for all these teams is really the key thing, especially for Miami. Then at number 2, yet again this week, it's the 49ers and Cowboys. And we'll say right now, San Fran's number 2 and number 1 is going to be Dallas yet again. These teams really are just the class of the NFL right now. Dallas and San Francisco just doesn't really seem to matter who you're putting in front of them. They're having these very complete victories. The 49ers were in a little bit of trouble against the Rams, but that is their arch rival. Sean McVay is a very brilliant coach, so can't really hold that against them. And San Francisco, where are they at here? San Francisco does play tomorrow night against the Giants, so I'm very confident they'll get back in the win column. Not that they lost this week, but I think it should be a more dominant win than against the Rams. And then for the Cowboys, they play the Cardinals this week, so I expect them to just tear apart the Arizona Cardinals. And I think we'll be sitting here this time next week talking about these two teams being the class of the NFL yet again. So very excited for week 3. Week 2 was a blast. Let me know if you guys have any disagreements with the rankings here. Really just your general thoughts. That's what this is all really about. Just like to talk about these teams, the general direction each of them are heading in. So let me know your thoughts down below, and look forward to week 3 starting tomorrow night with the Giants and the 49ers. Have a nice day, everybody.